Did you know that there are only 3 places in the entire Bible where God uses writing? In all these cases, the writing is made on the stone. And for a good reason. Unlike paper, stone is an eternal carrier of information. The first writing is made on Mount Sinai, when God gives Moses the 10 Commandments written on tablets of stone. A second writing, this time prophetic, is made on a wall in a Babylonian palace. The third writing will be the subject of this video, and it is the most mysterious one. Notice also that all 3 situations are connected with the temple. The tablets with the commandments were placed inside the temple. The prophetic inscription on a wall in Babylon was created because of the desecration of the temple vessels. Jesus was in the temple when he wrote on the ground. So what exactly did the Son of God write on the ground in the temple? I will try with a fairly high probability to decipher this puzzle for you. Chapter 8 of the Gospel of John is the only place in the New Testament where Jesus writes something, but what exactly it is, the scriptures doesn't reveal to us. However, we can determine with great accuracy from the law and context what was written there. It is also possible that Jesus wrote in such a way that only he and the Pharisees could read it. Jesus came as God in a human body, so we know for sure that he could write and read, and even more, read in people's minds. For who, if not God alone, knows better what is in the human heart? I sincerely doubt that Jesus was doodling on the ground at that moment just because he was bored. Can God be bored? I don't think so. Jesus writing with his finger, above all, symbolized legislation and the highest authority on earth. This writing by Jesus on the ground is of course not insignificant and has its own unique message. Every verse in the Bible has its place and everything is consistent, logical and meaningful. Okay then, let's move on to our title chapter and start our investigation. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. As you can see, the whole situation took place in the temple. Where exactly, I'm not sure, but it was most likely Solomon's Porch, because 2 chapters later, Jesus walks in this place and is again accosted by the Jews. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? Correct me if I'm wrong, but first of all, an unclean person could not come to the temple. And adultery is hardly a glorious deed. Secondly, if the woman was married or engaged and had committed adultery, law required that the man also be accused, but he was not there. Thirdly, if this woman was raped or had intercourse with a man as a virgin, the punishment was not as stoning. If that was the case and the Jews knew it, then they shouldn't have wanted to stone her. They should also bring the man and the woman's father. As we can see, this caricature of trial smells like a 3-day-old fish from the very beginning. Is it possible for the Pharisees to set up this entire scenario among themselves to achieve their goal? It is neither new nor secret that this was the pattern of conduct they had. In this situation they did not want justice, but rather to set a trap for Jesus. So they found a woman and took her to Jesus to challenge him. Besides, the Pharisees hated Jesus and would never make him any judge in any trial. Do we ask our enemies to solve our personal problems? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. Someone might say that since this happened in the temple, Jesus was writing on the stone floor and it was not legible. We forget, however, that it was early in the morning and the floor could still be damp, even more in a shaded place. In addition, this situation took place in October. It was not the hottest month of the year, and it could also rain on that day. Whether Jesus wrote on the wet or dusty floor, I'm not sure. But I know one thing. The Pharisees were able to read what he had written. There are many theories and speculations about what Jesus was actually writing at that moment. In my opinion, there are only 4 sensible hypotheses. Jesus wrote the sins of the Pharisees. Jesus wrote the names of the Pharisees. Jesus wrote the commandments. The first 3 hypotheses refer directly to the Pharisees' sinfulness and are quite logical, but never before had the Pharisees left their place of debate just because Jesus had publicly ashamed them. This time it could have been entirely something else: fear for the lives of the Pharisees and the fear of the people. So the 4th hypothesis is Jesus wrote the protocol of the proceedings according to the Torah. And this is the hypothesis that makes the most sense to me. Why? Because when Jesus was tempted by the devil, he used verses directly from the Torah. Exactly in the same book is the law that the Pharisees referred to before they tried to stone the woman. The Pharisees appealed to the law, so Jesus also answered them by referring to the law. Jesus didn't try to change or condemn the law, for he was the lawgiver. Besides, he didn't want to do it because that was what the Pharisees were waiting for. Jesus followed the letter of the law in every aspect of this trial. It is our own ignorance that makes us think that Jesus was acting against the law that day. If we believe that Jesus did change or break the law, we are like the Pharisees who were claiming that all the time. If Jesus broke anything, it was a human law. So what could Jesus' first writing on the ground look like? At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, but at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. Now imagine the faces of the Pharisees, who were deeply convinced that Jesus did not know the law and was speaking against it. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Why did none of them dare to throw a stone? Because they knew they were not acting lawfully, unlike Jesus, who neither abolished or changed any of the Mosaic laws of justice. Moreover, the Jews had no right to condemn anyone to death, as they were under the Roman magistrate. Therefore, the whole situation itself was quite paradoxical. So prior to the trial, Christ wrote something on the ground to remind them of what God's law required of witnesses, thus giving the Pharisees a chance to withdraw their charges before the actual trial begins. It is also amazing that despite the fact that the Pharisees hated Jesus, he tried to save their lives by discreetly writing on the ground and warning them that they could be stoned by the people as false witnesses instead of this woman if they continued with prosecution. Moreover, Jesus followed the spirit of the law, seeking and then finding a reason to show mercy not only to the Pharisees, but later also to the woman. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When Jesus began writing again, the Pharisees decided to walk away. Not only because they didn't like what Jesus wrote, but also because when God repeats something twice, the matter is settled and will be done immediately. And what could be second part of what Jesus wrote sounds like? If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges, which shall be in those days. And the judges shall make diligent inquisition, and behold, if the witness be a false witness, and had testified falsely against his brother, then shall ye do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. So shall put the evil away from among you. To put it in one sentence, a false witness who cannot prove a crime deserves the same punishment he wanted to punish his brother with. In this case, it would be a death penalty by stoning. So what Jesus wrote on the ground could have been 6 verses long. But not necessarily, because he could just paraphrase and write 2 or 3 witnesses rule and punishment for being a false witness. Pharisees who knew the law well would quickly understand what Jesus was referring to. Since Jesus had the right to order the execution of an adulterous woman, he also had the right to order the execution of false witnesses. Also, let us not forget that the Pharisees themselves on that day temporarily made Jesus their judge, and this conceit could have cost them their lives. However, if Jesus would have decided to speak aloud what he had written on the ground, the Pharisees would find themselves in a very difficult situation. And they which heard it, being convinced by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Notice that the oldest decided to leave first. They were the ones who knew the Torah best, and knew that if they didn't leave quickly, the people would stand and read what Jesus wrote. It can rightly be assumed that the Pharisees left this trial primarily out of fear of the people, and secondly because of shame. And so ended one of the shortest and kindest encounters between our Messiah and the Pharisees ever recorded in the New Testament. What about the woman? As we know, women in New Testament times were not even allowed to testify in the court as a witness. Therefore, the woman only at the end, when asked, opens her mouth to say something. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Had no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. On that day this woman's sins were forgiven, while being almost stoned to death. It is an amazing example of the gospel in practice. When we see no hope anymore, God intercedes for us and shows us mercy. What can be said about these Pharisees? Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. The Pharisees knew very well how to choose the right stones for stoning, but they failed to recognize one stone. This stone they should not have rejected, they rejected. That stone, of course, is Jesus Christ. And have you not read this scripture? The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes.